Welcome to the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast, where we bring you the latest insights, tips, and techniques to help you master the art of guitar playing. I'm your host, Steve Stine, and I'm committed to sharing my passion for the guitar while inspiring you and guiding you through your musical journey. Now remember that you can enjoy this podcast from anywhere and anytime, whether you're cruising down the highway, preparing dinner in the kitchen, or even working out at the gym. By incorporating the podcast into your daily routine, you'll be able to stay inspired and motivated in your guitar journey, no matter where life takes you. Now, let's dive into today's podcast. So, Tim, I got to ask you about this whole Bon Jovi Runaway thing. I've known for a long time that you played on it, but I was in the car with my daughter. She's 10 years old, and the radio was on, and Runaway came on, and I was trying to explain to her that it was you that played on that tune, and she, of course, didn't really care because she doesn't care about Bon Jovi or any of the music I listen to anyway. But I thought it would be a really amazing story because I don't know the story. All I know is from the general perspective that Bon Jovi wasn't really Bon Jovi at this point. It was just John Bon Jovi. And so if you would give us the story, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I'll run it down quickly. I was hired to do a John Waite record in Manhattan, and Neil Giraldo was the producer, which at the time was very exciting because he was the other half of Pat Benatar, a great guitar player. They were doing great records. And so I went to New York, and the record was at the Power Station, which was owned by Tony Bon Jovi. And John was living upstairs. It's a story that's pretty famous. He was living upstairs and sweeping the floors and learning whatever he could about recording. It was an apartment up above. So we did this John Waite record, and the guitars were going well. And John, I met John, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to do some master demos. Why don't you come back? When you come back to New York, why don't you come do them with me?" I said, of course I'll do them. And so I was back to do. I joined. Then a lot was going on for me at that point. I was 23. I joined Rick Springfield's band, and I went back to work to do 2 nights at Carnegie Hall. Maybe it was 4 nights, something like that, with Rick. And it happened to coincide with the same time of this recording of John's master demos. And so we did 6 songs, and it was me and Aldo Nova and Frankie LaRocca and Roy Bittan from the E Street Band, the keyboard player, the piano, who's great. And I ended up working with Roy on tons of stuff out here in LA after that. So we tracked all the stuff. And then when it came time to do Runaway, I started overdubbing. And for whatever reason, I ended up doing all the rhythms and all the leads on that song. We plugged into different Marshalls, and I had my Schecter Stratocaster that had a gold pickguard. And I also think I had a BC Rich. And they just brought all the Marshalls, and we did all that stuff. So a little later on, John played me the actual finished demos, and I think we went to dinner at his mom's house, and they sounded great, but I was already in Rick Springfield's band at that point, and Rick was arguably one of the biggest stars in America at that point, and it was a really fun thing, and I didn't really have the image to be in Bon Jovi anyway, and he eventually got his mates, including Richie Sambora, who was absolutely the right guitar player for him, to be in the band with him. But the coolest thing for me was there was one song that ended up on the first Bon Jovi record that wasn't the band, and it was that song Runaway, and we were all credited. If you look at the LP, we're all credited, or the CD, or Wikipedia, wherever you look. I mean, so he was good about that. and the funny thing was, I remember touring with Rick Springfield and watching Bon Jovi in front of my very eyes become the biggest rock band in the world. Right. And I was kind of like, well, wait a second, I was right next to that. Is that a train? Was there a train that I was supposed to walk onto a train in the train station that could have just stepped on?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's just amazing. So it was just a chance meeting?
Well, because I was at the Power Station, and he just happened to be putting together his master demos with Tony. And I think they had a falling out because Tony helped him get going. And as often happens, people, and they're family. So I think Tony was his cousin or uncle. And so I was there at the Power Station, and Neil Giraldo, if you listen to the guitars on Ignition by John Waite, they're great guitars. And it's because Neil Giraldo basically held me, he taught me how to get sounds. It was an awesome thing for me. And so we were doing great guitars. He heard those guitars, and he asked me to do the his music. So
right. Yeah. So do you know, like, how did Bon Jovi wind up in this situation that, because obviously he's an amazing singer, and that, like you said, it just, the whole thing just catapulted after that. And, I think about, like, nowadays with me, if I'm recording with somebody, it's not walking into someone who nobody knows, and there's, you bring in room full of marshals and all this stuff. So obviously somebody saw, because had John done something prior to this?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that. Okay, I think he was 18 years old. I was 23 and he was 18. At 18, he had laser focus about world domination. And I kid you not, it was almost like he was laser focused on being the biggest rock star in the world. And it didn't really matter. It wasn't about talent, which he has plenty of, but he knew exactly what he wanted to do. And then because in those days, you had to have a studio. You had to have all the best stuff. You couldn't do it yourself. You had to go. So you had to have a patron, and he had a patron. He had Tony. So he had everything in place. So he took those demos to a record company. They signed him. And then the really smart thing, I think, the thing that catapulted them, so he got the record deal. He put his band together. But you're talking about a kid who had no, like, I finally stopped messing around at age 50. This kid, John, was not messing around at 18. He was focused on what he wanted to do.
Right.
And, you don't see that all the time. I mean, he had no distractions. He didn't take drugs. He didn't get sidetracked. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. So I saw that. I mean, and that's rare. And also, so there was a music industry ready for him at that point. Because if you knew people and you had a good master demo, you could get signed. I'm sure he got a good attorney and Tony hooked him up or however it worked. That's another story that I don't know.
Sure.
But the thing that made them superstars, I believe, him and Richie Sambora and Desmond Child, the songs they wrote were unbelievable. He was smart enough to know that he needed Desmond Child.
Right.
And that he needed to co-write these songs with those two people. And when those songs started getting written, and then whatever producer they had, it might have been Bruce Fairbairn or Bob Rock, one of those two guys, I forget. Right. He just got the best people to fill in all of the blanks. He knew what he could do well, and he had the best people write his songs with him and the best producer produce.
Wow.
And that's what I think made him go from just being a gold. The first Bon Jovi record I remember went gold. But what made him a multi-platinum biggest rock star in the world, biggest rock band in the world, was the writing team and
right.
the production. But those three writers writing those songs.
Right. Wow. So tell me a little bit, like, when you were in the studio and you're recording this, do you remember, like, when you were recording the song, the actual song, the solo and all this other, because everything about it, especially from a guitar player's perspective, everything about it was iconic, not just John singing and stuff, but the whole thing was, so, when you and I hooked up and became friends, I'm just astonished at how humble you are, but yet you've been a part of some just incredible things. And so I'm excited to kind of hear the story of this whole thing.
Well, the thing is, I moved to LA at the end of 1979, and I jumped right in, and the industry was strong. So I was able to kind of jump into a very vibrant, robust industry. So I have it up here. Okay, so I don't know if you discovered this too. You probably discovered it and moved on to a million other things. But I discovered if at fret 9 you do a harmonic, it sounds very wicked.
Yeah.
And that's all that is. It's like me going, it's one of those discoveries. If you do it here, it sounds nice. If you do it here, it sounds nice. But if you do it here,
yeah, there's like pitches going down, pitches going up.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
all kinds of weird stuff.
All of a sudden you get skull and crossbones, right? Okay, so that's that. And then a lot of this was I realized when I moved to LA in the 80s that like these days, eighth note parts happen up top. It's like you're going. But in those days, the eighth notes were all down here. And so that's all that is. I knew enough. I had my Schecter. Did I tell you that already? I had my Schecter with the gold. And so that was that. But when it came to the solo, I don't exactly remember, but I probably used my BC Rich Mockingbird or a Les Paul that they may have had sitting there at the studio, because you got to figure I was in the power station. I had some of my gear there, but the amps were just Marshalls that had been brought in. That's what in those days. You just brought in all the Marshalls and you figured out which one sounded best. You might have 6 heads sitting there. So they brought in Marshalls that we used. Not a lot else, you know, you just... So you can hear... Oh, so the solo has some elements to it, but there was also some of this. You know, the wang bar stuff. But I remember in the solo, there was something that I was doing a lot of those days, which was this. And I would do it. I did it a little too much. And so you hear it in this solo. I can show you. It's like, stop.
That is so
great.
Yeah.
So this was just standing there in the studio with Tony Bon Jovi sitting there. I think the engineer was a guy named Lance Quinn, and then John sitting there too, calling the shots. Because like I said, at 18, he was laser focused.
Right.
Laser focused.
So how many times was there like multiple takes of the solo, or was it how did you come about that? Did
I don't remember.
Okay.
No, there was no rehearsing. I mean, I already knew the song because we had tracked it. Right. So what happened typically, you would do a tracking session, and then almost always you would just keep the drums, because you would you would get the other sounds better in the overdub stage. So they might just get the drums and bass in the tracking session, send all the other guys home, because everybody's time and energy is expensive, and then you would redo the guitars in the overdub mode. And this was the case for that. So I would say what happens usually, I don't remember, but I probably got like a third of the solo, and then they said, go high, and I went, and then I went, yeah, and then I probably blew the ending, and then they punched in, and I went, whatever the ending lick is.
Right.
So it was probably 2 punches. It was probably done,
right,
in three sections. Let's listen. Yeah, and something I still do these days, a lot of times I end a solo on a down note. And I wish I ended more, it's just a nice alternative rather than ending on the high note, because we all end on the high note a lot.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But, the band was going to E, so, But if you listen to this solo, it's kind of exactly the way I sound today in some ways, too.
Right. It's just so...
It's like identical. Wow.
You have that. I have my cat is sitting over here. I'm just waiting for the cat to jump on my lap. So,
yeah, something in the closet just fell. So sorry. Anyway, but yeah, it was really fun.
Right. Okay. So when you were doing this, how many tracks do you think you did? Because there's the muting thing.
Yeah. Let me listen, and I'll tell you. Okay,
that
so the
is one of my favorite
thing,
parts right there. Yeah. Just that thing. I love that part.
So that would have been doubled, right? So that's the main part.
Right.
So you would do that, they would pan it all the way to one side, and then you would double it exactly, they'd pan it all the way to the other side. And then this next thing's an overdub. This. But let's. And that was my Schecter. So the other thing was probably the Les Paul style guitar, and then this overdub was definitely the Strat. Oh, it's the E. So it was the. So that's guitar number 3. Let's listen.
I am absolutely geeking out.
So I'm thinking just 2 main guitars, this overdub guitar in the center, and then the solo. I may have only taken 3 tracks.
Wow.
Now remember, this was 24-track recording, so there was limited space. And it was very soon after that. I mean, this was like 1982 or 1983. Very soon after that, people were slaving and syncing up 2 24-track machines together. But this could have been done on 1 24-track, especially because it was the budget was, probably very small, and it was coming out of Tony Bon Jovi's pocket or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
It was probably 1 24-track. So all these, that's just 3 tracks.
Wow.
So what happens is there's the overdub strat, there's the 2 basic heavy rhythms, and then probably on the overdub strat track is where the solo appears.
Wow. That's so cool. I'm amazed. It's cool because again, I'm 48 at the time of this recording, and I remember the whole Bon Jovi thing and Runaway. Like all my friends, we were all into it, and it's so weird. I'll have to tell you a story someday about a friend of mine, Steve Grimmett, who is the lead singer from Grim Reaper. And I was a huge fan of Grim Reaper, and then many years later, he and I wound up becoming best friends. He was the best man at my wedding and whatever. But I find it interesting that after all these years, I'm actually getting to talk to you about something as iconic as that tune.
Well, and I'll just tell you a couple more things. I have a friend who's connected to Bon Jovi. John Shanks has produced and written probably the last 6 records with John. John's a friend of mine, and Phil X is a good friend of mine too. And Phil and John are the guitar players in Bon Jovi right now. So
right.
I'm kind of like I kind of know what's going on over there, and they're still doing great. But I had another experience with John. Exactly 10 years later, I was at A&M, which is now Henson, which is one of the bigger studios in LA. It's an amazing place. There's 4 big fancy rooms there, and I was walking down the hall. And John walked around the corner in the hallway and said, "Hey, Tim, I just finished a Christmas song. I need a solo." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." Because he had just had Don Felder from the Eagles play, and they didn't get a solo. So it ended up being one of the best solos I've played on a record. It turned out really nicely. I'm going to go to it and find it here. It was "Please Come Home for Christmas."
I'm familiar with this tune, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really good. It's really good. So that's Don Felder from the Eagles playing the rhythm, and then it comes to the end, and that chance meeting with John in the hallway. It's actually one of my favorite solos that I've ever played on a record. It turned out really good. The tone is really good.
Right?
Yeah. To the key of A. I know that now. Yeah. It's exactly the kind of stuff I play all the time. I knew that was an altered chord, and so my way around it is just to kind of play the 1 and the flat 5. If you don't know something, sometimes you can just take 2 notes and make a lick out of it. That's what that is. And I kind of mixing minor and major, but if you get a chance on Spotify, it's a nice, and they play it every Christmas. It's nice. I'll be in like Home Depot or whatever, and it'll come on, and it's like, yeah, that's so cool. That's the thing about Christmas songs; they get played forever. So.
Right.
But that was exactly 10 years later, so it was kind of neat to meet him by chance in the hallway and do one more solo for Bon Jovi.
Wow, that is so cool. I appreciate you telling us that story. That's just neat.
It was fun, and it's been a pleasure to have been able to live with that for all these years. I'm really grateful.
If you like our podcast and want to hear more, remember to press the subscribe button on the app that you listen to. By doing this, you help us a lot, and you'll be the first to know when we have new episodes ready for you to listen to. Is this podcast fun and useful? Then please give it a thumbs up and write about how much you like it. Is this podcast not what you thought it would be? Please let us know. This helps us to make our podcast better and helps more people who love guitar find it as well. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us what you think.